Sachin, can you please tell me all about Podimo?
Oh, wow, that's a big start. Open question. Yeah, so Podimo is a podcast audio platform. Exists in 7 markets today, 6 in Europe, and is live in Mexico as well. Originated in 2019 out of Denmark in Copenhagen, and was really founded under the principle that in too many markets, and with the rise of podcasting and audio in too many markets, the monetization hadn't really caught up to the value that was being created by creators and for listeners. So while the US and maybe a few others have a strong audio advertising market that supports a reasonably large creator ecosystem, that's not the case in too many markets outside of the US. And even in the US, I would argue it's quite top heavy, right? So how do we bring together that, or how do we bridge that gap where in a market like Denmark there are top creators who have 100,000 plus, in a relatively small market, weekly listeners that aren't making nearly enough for what their value they're providing. And so we knew that direct consumer payment subscription in particular needed to be a part of the monetization ecosystem. And so the platform was born, not just the business model, but the product itself, through that lens of how do we create a much more diversified ecosystem, like monetization ecosystem for creators. And then through that, ideally also of just a better listening experience, whether that's as simple as ad-free all the way to significantly more value that we can provide because certain genres, certain verticals, certain experiences are much harder to monetize with advertising. So being able to turn that revenue stream around and actually provide more value and a better listening experience for those who value podcasts and value the audio experience. So that's the origin story. It launched in Denmark first, and then quickly grew to a few other markets. We're live now, as I mentioned, in 6. So that's Denmark, Netherlands, Norway, Finland, Germany, and Spain in Europe, and then, as I mentioned, Mexico. Um, and yeah, I mean, we've met with quite a bit of success in terms of driving. I think I would imagine, though I don't obviously have numbers from other platforms. I think the largest subscription podcast business in Europe right now. And that's really come because we've worked with creators who agree with our mission and have been willing to move some, or if not all, of their show behind the paywall and driving those listeners that genuinely care about that experience to pay. And not that, we're talking about €5 to €7 in most of our markets per month.
And I think it's important, isn't it, that I think as listeners, I think people just expect it to be free,
Yeah.
and I think what you're doing is fantastic. But I think, you know, how has it been trying to convince people that, look, if you want this, because I guess a lot of podcasts will generate their money from sort of spot advertising, on their shows, or maybe supplementing, to try and get people to pay via like a Patreon on the
Yep.
side of it.
Yep.
So how difficult has it been to sort of convince people that stuff that they generally get for free, look,
Hmm.
you got to pay for this, and they
Yeah.
should, because it's people's work and it's people's art.
Yeah. I would say that the hard part is building the initial momentum, right? I think once you break through that mental barrier, you start to see the resistance fade, especially for people who, again, either have a certain loyalty to the creator that they've been, or the podcast that they've been listening to, or in our case, multiple podcasts, right? Because the value we provide is not simply paying for one show, but rather a catalog of great shows that are only accessible behind our paywall, and for those willing to pay. But yeah, it takes a moment. And honestly, I think once we get creators to understand the value proposition, once we get to the podcasters themselves to understand why this is good for them and the ecosystem as a whole, the listener side kind of comes with them collectively. So it's not easy, but then, I think, like, I've come from the music industry in the past at a time. I started in the music industry at a time where people had started to become, and a generation, or at least a half generation, had started to become accustomed to getting music for free. And so ultimately, it's really that question of what is the value proposition that you can provide to break through that mental model of, okay, not only am I willing to pay, but I stopped thinking about it after a while, right? Obviously, Spotify's met since with a ton of success in changing the idea of paying for music in such a way that people don't think about it anymore. Similarly, we want to achieve a certain sense of, no, you should pay for audio. It's not that expensive, and you get more value for paying for it.
So, actually, if there's going to be plenty of podcasters listening to this now that are probably hosting their content on maybe some of the biggest platforms, in the industry, that generally operate with the ad revenue
Yeah.
model. What would you say would be the instant benefits for them to consider Podimo as a platform?
Yeah, I mean, look, what I would say is we're not necessarily trying to replace everybody, right? Or we're not suggesting everybody needs to move behind the
Sure.
paywall. It's really a question of what are you optimizing for at a given time. If you are comfortable with how much you're making from advertising, if you feel like you are being, or maybe it's not your main source of revenue, right? Maybe podcasting is an ancillary voice or an ancillary channel for your voice. You are maximizing for reach and you're okay with not making as much money as I think you should be making, or we think you should be making, then by all means continue to do what you're doing. You also have the option of trying to do it yourself, right? Trying to say, like you said, whether it's Patreon or using Spotify's or Acast, whoever's subscription tools, you can in fact try to do it yourself. I think what we're saying is twofold. One is, again, for too many markets, or if you feel, which we think most creators and most podcasters are under monetized, let's work together to optimize that part of your business, whether that's wholly bringing your podcast behind the paywall, in which we're able to anywhere from double in the worst case to 10x how much you're making today from advertising, in the cases of the deals that we're making with creators. That becomes, I think, quite palatable. And over time, we find that we're not only able to bring, an initial audience, a significant portion of their initial audience over, but in many cases over time, grow to achieve the audience they had before, and in some cases even greater than the audience they had before behind the paywall. So the long-term vision for this is not only can we get people to pay and generate significantly more revenue for you, but over time you will also not see a loss in the reach that you're getting. But again, I think it's the optionality in the market. If and when you are ready to say, I should be making more from what I'm doing, then a platform like Podimo does two things. One, it has an existing engine of subscribers and revenue that we're able to tap into to create, to work on an economic model that makes sense for new creators. But also we're saying you don't have to do this yourself, right? Managing your own subscription business, your own Patreon business is a company in itself. And we think that what we've been able to do is to take over a lot of that, or to do a lot of that for a creator and maximize their business for them. And also by providing this kind of value of a bundle, right? Having all of these different great shows behind the paywall, it's also better for their listeners. If you're a super fan of an individual creator, you might be happy or willing to pay to their Patreon or subscribe to their product. But there's some of those listeners that are like, oh, but now I have to subscribe to this one that I like, and this one that I like, and this one that I like. We sort of jump ahead and solve that problem for the listener side.
Okay. And moving forwards, I know there's been acquisitions. Tell us a little bit about Podimo moving forwards.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting time for us. So again, like I said, we've met with a lot of traction, and we're really excited about the momentum we've been able to build in driving the subscription business. We are working with more and different types of creators every day, but we also see that some of them are either not willing yet or are sort of in a transitionary phase in terms of how they might work with our paywall. And so what we've done in the Netherlands is to actually to invest in both sides of the business, right? So subscription is still our core. It's our mission. It's essential to our mission. And frankly, the ad business is there. It's growing slowly or faster in some markets, depending on the maturity of the market. But subscription is the center of what we do, but we believe that there's an opportunity to complement that and also work with creators in different ways so that we can effectively say, for those that are optimizing in reach and their ad supported business, we want to be able to support you If you're in between where there's an opportunity to bring some value behind the paywall, we now have this synergy between the sort of open cross-platform side of the business and the premium subscription side of the business. And then, of course, increase over time, convince more and more creators to say, we are now at scale. Also, you're going to make a lot more money, and your listeners are going to get so much more value if we bring you behind the paywall. So it's by building out the side of the business that can support creators who aren't yet willing to work behind the paywall, we think we can actually marry the benefits of both models for the creators and shows that we work with. And so we've invested in this in the Netherlands, and it's something that we would look to grow in other markets as well. So now suddenly, if you're thinking about, okay, who can I work with to not only maximize my reach, but maximize my revenue as well, Podimo becomes a one-stop shop.
And can you tell us a little bit more about your plans in the UK?
Yeah, it's super early in the UK. We do have just because of the talent in London and all of that, we have different parts of our organization. I have a few people on my team in London on the content side. We have we have a few product employees, like PMs and researchers in London. So we already have a presence in London without actually having the product in London. Right now, we are focused very much on continuing to scale in the markets that we're live in. But as we achieve sort of some of our targets and profitability across more of our markets, we're already profitable in some of our markets. We're growing towards that in all of our markets. We'll look to expansion again, and the UK is very much top of mind in terms of sort of the next frontier. Timing on that is yet to be determined, but we hope sooner than later.
Fantastic. Well, us at Pod Bubble will definitely support that as you
Yeah.
grow in the UK. There's going to be plenty of creators, not just listeners, watching this and listening to this. If they're interested in finding out how Podimo can help their content, where would you send them? Where's the best place to find out about everything that you do?
We have our sort of podcaster creator website. We also have a portal at Studio. I should have known this URL off the top of my head, but it's a Podimo Studio website. It's fairly easy to get to from podimo.com. And yeah, I mean, you can find out more information there, reach out. We have, the email link, and we will get back to you ASAP. So just a couple things to note on that. For one, we also would like to bring more sort of English language content to other markets, right? So we have done translations in the past. That's something that we want to continue to think about. Again, going back to this idea of, okay, once you're paying, how do we bring you more value that maybe the ad-supported business wouldn't alone support the investment in? And this is an area where we say, so I should have started with this, and part of the Podimo origin story, beyond just this idea of the idea that the ecosystem will thrive if people are willing to pay, or at least that's part of the revenue model. The other part of Podimo's sort of real mission is ensuring that a lot of these smaller markets are able to support local language creators, right? So it's not the idea of bringing big English creators in their native language across to other markets, or having Rogan be one of the top podcasters in every market. That's great, that exists. But the idea that we really want to focus on making sure that the Danish audience has strong Danish content, the German audience has strong German content, et cetera. But part of that is also bringing English language content into those languages. And so if you're a creator and you're interested in how to get more visibility in Germany and Spain and Denmark and the Netherlands, et cetera, that's something that we also are interested in pursuing. And so if you're thinking about, from a UK perspective, how to work with Podimo even before we're live, there may be some opportunities there. Again, not everything, but obviously something that we'd be interested in pursuing if we think it makes sense for our audience.
Fantastic. Zakin, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.